The night my father pointed across a crowded ballroom and called me a failure in front of 160 of Toronto's most connected people. I was carrying a tray of champagne flutes, and I did not spill a single one. That detail matters to me even now. He spotted me from across the room. I think he'd been looking for a reason all evening, and his expression changed so fast it was almost comic. He excused himself from the conversation he was having with 3 senior partners from his firm, crossed the marble floor with the kind of purposeful stride that means someone is about to make a scene, and stopped directly in front of me. He didn't lower his voice. He never did when he had an audience. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" he said. I looked at him. I didn't answer. "You're serving drinks. You're serving drinks to my clients." He said it slowly, like he was reading from a list of personal failures I had compiled specifically to inconvenience him. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" A few nearby conversations had already gone quiet. More would follow. He knew that. "I raised you better than this," he continued. "I gave you every opportunity, and this is where you ended up. A catering girl. My daughter, standing here in a uniform, serving my guests like hired help." I stood with my tray, shoulders back, and I waited. It was the waiting that seemed to bother him most. A few seconds passed, long enough for the silence to spread further through the room. Then a woman seated at the nearest table looked up from her dinner plate. She had been watching the entire exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read, and when she spoke, she addressed no one in particular. "I'm sorry," she said carefully, "but isn't she the owner of this hotel? Before we continue, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I've been genuinely touched to hear from people all across Canada, and every message means something to me. If you're new here, please subscribe so you don't miss what comes next." What happened that night at the Granville didn't begin in that ballroom. It started almost 15 years earlier, in a different room entirely. The dining room of my father's house in Rosedale, where the table was always laid for people who had earned his approval. And I was quietly learning that I was never quite going to be one of them. My father built his career in commercial real estate development. He started from a modest background in Scarborough, which I think is part of why he became so attached to the idea that what a person owned said everything about who they were. By the time I was a teenager, he had enough money to buy a house in one of Toronto's most exclusive neighborhoods, enough connections to get our family into rooms most people never see, and enough certainty in his own judgment to make life genuinely difficult for anyone who questioned it. My name is Sylvie, and for as long as I can remember, I tried to earn a kind of approval that was never really available to me. I was his eldest daughter from his first marriage. My mother died when I was 7, a short illness, fast and terrible, and my father remarried a few years later. My stepmother was not a cruel woman. She had a talent, though, for looking past things that made her uncomfortable, and I was often one of those things. My brother, her son with my father, could do almost nothing wrong in either of their eyes. I could do almost nothing right. I want to be fair about this, because fairness is something I've had to practice deliberately. My father was not a monster. He coached my brother's hockey team on Saturday mornings, and he paid his employees on time, and he gave generously to causes that reflected well on him. He worked hard, in his way, and he said so constantly, which made it all the more confusing when the specific work I chose became the thing he held against me most. I was 22 when I told him I wasn't joining the firm. He looked at me the way people look at a forecast that has ruined their weekend plans. Disappointed and slightly inconvenienced. "Hospitality," he repeated when I explained where I wanted to go. "You want to manage hotels." "I want to understand how they work," I said, "from the bottom up." "You already have a career waiting for you," he said. "My firm. You wouldn't have to start at the bottom anywhere." I tried to explain it properly. I'd spent a summer working at a small inn near Georgian Bay during my last year of university, and something about the experience had stayed with me. The particular satisfaction of a well-run place, the way logistics and genuine warmth could work together to make a stranger feel immediately at ease. I wanted to learn that industry properly. I wanted to understand it from the inside, in the way you can only understand something by living inside it. He heard none of that. What he heard was that I was choosing something smaller than what he'd built, and that felt, to him, like a comment on him. After that conversation, every family gathering became a performance. My stepmother would offer something politely vague about my journey, and my brother would smirk from behind his wineglass, and my father would find a moment always when the table was full of relatives or business associates or old friends, to bring up his daughter, the hotel worker. He phrased it as a joke. He was very skilled at phrasing things as jokes. "She's out there folding towels," he'd say. And people would laugh because they weren't sure what else to do. "She's working her way up," someone might offer. "She's working sideways," he'd answer, and that would land better. I stopped attending those dinners after a while. It wasn't a dramatic decision. I didn't make a speech or send a letter. I simply started being unavailable when invitations came, and eventually they came less often, and eventually he stopped expecting me there at all. I had work to focus on anyway. The Granville had been a fixture in downtown Toronto since the late 1970s. It wasn't the flashiest hotel in the city. The towers along King Street had long outgrown it in scale, but it had those broad limestone floors and that particular quality of afternoon light in the lobby that certain older buildings hold on to, and it had a reputation once as the kind of place where Toronto's working life played out over dinner and late meetings, where things were decided and celebrated, and sometimes quietly mourned. By the time I joined as an events coordinator assistant, the place was struggling, not visibly, not in ways the average guest would notice. The ballrooms were still lit, the flower arrangements still fresh. But anyone who paid close attention could feel the strain underneath. Deferred maintenance showing up in small ways. A purchasing system that hadn't been meaningfully updated in years. A turnover problem in two key departments that the general manager, a patient and deeply experienced man named Stefan, was managing through goodwill and careful scheduling and not much else. I paid attention. During my first year, I worked my way into every department I could get access to. I helped with housekeeping scheduling during a shortage that left the morning shift 2 people short for 3 weeks. I spent time in the kitchen during a stretch when the banquet team lost 2 supervisors inside a month. I asked Stefan if I could sit in on vendor negotiations, and he agreed with the expression of a man who couldn't remember the last time someone had asked. I learned the receiving process, the inventory cycle, the way a large event gets built from the ground up in the 48 hours before guests arrive. Every new piece of understanding changed how I saw the whole. That is the thing about learning something from the inside. You stop being able to look at the surface without seeing what is holding it up. Stefan told me, about 18 months in, that I was the first events coordinator in his tenure who had ever asked to spend a week learning the loading dock operation. "Most people don't want to know about the loading dock," he said. "I think that's part of the problem," I said. He looked at me steadily for a moment, and then invited me to the next ownership meeting, which turned out to be more significant than either of us mentioned at the time. The financial situation had become impossible to ignore by then. The hotel was carrying debt that had been accumulating for years, the kind that gets manageable in good years and catastrophic in uncertain ones, and the ownership group was exhausted. They had run out of creative solutions and most of their energy. They began quietly accepting that the building would need to change hands. I started pulling historical financial records. I told Stefan I was looking for operational patterns, which was true, but I found something else as well. Buried in the documents from about a decade earlier was a joint development partnership that had gone badly wrong. A commercial arrangement with an outside company that defaulted on its obligations partway through, leaving the Granville holding losses it had never fully absorbed. I traced the corporate structure of the defaulting party carefully, because I wanted to be certain, before I believed what the numbers were telling me. The company traced back through 2 registered holding entities in Ontario to my father's development firm. I sat with that information for several days before deciding what to do with it, which was, in the end, nothing immediately. Not because I planned to use it for leverage later, but because I wasn't ready to let it change what I was building. If I reacted to it then, the entire project would become about him, and I didn't want that. I never wanted that. What I focused on instead was the question of the acquisition itself. I had been saving carefully since my early 20s, a habit born less from discipline than from genuinely not spending money on things that didn't interest me. I had some capital, but not nearly enough on its own. What I also had, by that point, was a network, 2 investors I'd come to know through industry events over several years, careful and methodical people who understood heritage hospitality real estate, and what it could be worth in a city where that kind of property didn't become available often. I brought them the Granville as an opportunity, not as a personal project. I showed them the numbers as they were and the numbers as they could be. They asked good questions. I answered them. We agreed on terms. I retained a commercial real estate lawyer I trusted and we incorporated a numbered company, 1114632 Ontario Inc., through which to run the acquisition. In Ontario, this is a standard approach for keeping negotiations clean and confidential, and it meant my name would not appear in publicly accessible documents until after the deal closed, which suited me for reasons I didn't fully articulate even to myself at the time. The negotiation took 5 months. There were several moments when it nearly fell apart. A complication with the title documentation, related to a heritage designation from the building's original 1978 classification, and a difficult week in the 4th month, when one of my investors became anxious about a clause in the commercial mortgage terms, and I had to make a sustained case for the overall picture. Each time, I sat with the discomfort and kept working rather than walking away. When the transaction finally closed, I was the controlling shareholder of the Granville Hotel. I told Stefan the day it was confirmed. He received the information with the same unruffled composure he brought to everything, asked me one practical question: whether I wanted the transition handled quietly or formally, and when I said quietly, he nodded and we moved forward. I kept working exactly as I had, same office, same hours, same uniform when the occasion called for it. The rest of the staff did not know, and I did not tell them. I wanted to earn whatever confidence they had in me through the work itself, not through a title. And I wanted to understand the building's rhythms and real problems without anyone managing their behavior around what they assumed I needed to see. What changed was underneath the surface. The maintenance backlog began clearing, systematically, department by department. The procurement system was rebuilt over 4 months, with input from the people actually using it every day. I had a careful series of conversations with the City of Toronto's Heritage Preservation Office, and eventually secured access to a restoration grant program for the building's original limestone facade that the previous ownership had never applied for, despite qualifying for years. 2 underperforming departments were restructured in ways that, as it turned out, benefited the staff at least as much as the operation. The hotel was improving. Anyone inside it could feel it. My father booked the Granville for his firm's annual Client Appreciation Gala on the recommendation of a business partner, who had attended an event there several months earlier and been impressed by the ballroom and the service. My father liked the address. He liked that the Granville had a reputation he recognized, which he took, as he took most things, as a reflection of his own judgment. He had no way of knowing, when he signed the event contract, that his eldest daughter's approval had been required to finalize the booking. The evening of the gala, I worked the floor. This was not unusual for me. I had done it for the last 6 major events, and I intended to keep doing it. Standing outside an event and reading reports afterward tells you something. Moving through it while it's happening tells you everything. I put on the same black uniform the banquet team wore, and I helped with service. My father arrived just after 7:30 with my stepmother and several clients from a current development project in Mississauga. He was in excellent form. That particular brightness he carried when an evening was going his way, and the room was the right size and the right people were in it. I kept my distance. I was busy. Around 9 o'clock, during the main course service, I was checking on a station near the east windows when I heard his voice behind me. "Stop." I turned around. He was standing about 12 feet away, and his expression had already moved past surprise into something harder. I had seen that specific transition before, the moment when his discomfort found a direction. "What," he said carefully, "are you doing here?" "I work here." "You work here." He repeated it the way people repeat something they've misheard, hoping the second time will clarify. "As a server." "I'm helping with the service tonight." He covered the distance between us in a few steps. The tables nearby had gone quiet. He didn't seem to notice or didn't care to. "Do you understand what this looks like?" His voice carried further than I think he intended, or perhaps exactly as far as he intended. "I have 20 years of client relationships in this room tonight. Partners, city councilors, people I have worked to build real trust with over decades. And you are walking around serving food in a uniform." His jaw was tight. "What am I supposed to tell them? How do I explain to these people that this is my daughter?" I didn't say anything. "You have wasted every advantage I ever gave you. Every single one. You had a path and you chose this." He looked at the tray in my hand. You are an embarrassment. You have always been an embarrassment. And you stand there looking at me like you've done nothing wrong at all." The room around us had gone almost entirely quiet by then. Not perfectly. There was still the sound of a conversation continuing somewhere near the back, a glass being set down. But the immediate space had stilled and I could feel people watching from every direction. I stood with the tray and let him finish. The woman at the table nearest to us had been watching everything. From the moment he crossed the room. She was a board member, I confirmed later, of one of the oldest charitable foundations in Toronto. Someone who had spent 4 decades in this city's professional community, and had learned, I imagine, to recognize the shape of a situation before it resolved itself. When my father's voice finally stopped, she set down her fork with a small, deliberate sound. "Forgive me," she said. She wasn't speaking to him or to me specifically, just into the space between us. I recognized her from the correspondence I received last year, when this property changed ownership. She looked at me steadily. "Are you not the person who acquired the Granville?" My father laughed. It was a short, hollow sound. "There's been some kind of misunderstanding." Stefan was already crossing the room. He stopped a pace to my left, and spoke with the straightforward courtesy that characterized everything he did. "Mr." He used my father's name. "The woman you are speaking to is the controlling owner of this hotel. She has held that position for the past 14 months. The entire management team here reports to her." He turned to me briefly. "The documents you asked about this morning are ready for your signature whenever you're ready." I passed the tray to the staff member closest to me and accepted the folder Stefan was holding out. I turned to the final pages, signed where Stefan had indicated, and returned it. The room was very still. I looked around at the people watching, the guests, the staff lined along the far wall, my father, and I spoke without any particular emphasis because the words did not need it. "I completed the purchase of this hotel 14 months ago, through a numbered company, which is standard practice for a transaction of this size, when you want the process handled on its merits rather than on your name." I paused. "I didn't buy this building to prove anything. I bought it because it was worth preserving, and because the people who had built their careers within these walls deserved a buyer who understood what that meant." I looked toward my father. "The financial records of this property include documentation of a partnership arrangement from approximately a decade ago that created substantial losses the previous ownership was never able to fully recover from. The company on the other side of that arrangement traced back to this firm." I kept my voice level. "I raise that not to cause harm tonight. I raise it because it is part of the honest story of how I came to be standing in this room in the role I hold, and because the people who work here deserve to have the truth understood clearly." No one said anything. "I'm going to check on the dessert service," I said. "I hope everyone has a good rest of the evening." The consequences that followed were gradual, in the way these things tend to be. My father's firm did not lose clients overnight. Reputations move slowly in both directions, and Bay Street is not a place where anyone says out loud what they have quietly decided. But I heard from people I had come to know, through years of industry work, that certain conversations had become harder for him to initiate. Questions were being asked in meetings where they hadn't been asked before. 2 development projects that had been in early conversation with his firm moved quietly to other developers. No announcements were made. They didn't need to be. What 160 people had witnessed that evening was something simpler than business. They had seen how my father treated someone he believed had no leverage. If he was willing to do that to his own daughter, in public, with witnesses, the question they were silently working through was how he might treat them when circumstances became difficult. That kind of calculation, once made, doesn't unmake itself. At the Granville, things moved in the opposite direction entirely. The staff learned the full story over the following week, naturally, through the ordinary way that information moves through a building where people spend long shifts together. Their reaction was quieter than I expected and warmer than I felt I'd earned. The senior member of the housekeeping team, a woman who had worked at the Granville for over 20 years and knew the building better than any of the managers, stopped me in the corridor on the second morning. "I had a feeling," she said. I asked her what kind. "The kind where someone cares too much to just be doing a job," she said. "You can't fake that. People can always tell." I thought about that for a long time afterward. The hotel continued to improve. By the following year, Guest satisfaction scores were the strongest the property had recorded in its history. We were running at high occupancy through what had historically been the 3 weakest months on the calendar. The facade restoration work was completed in the spring, and the City of Toronto's Heritage Preservation Office sent a formal letter of commendation that I had framed and hung in Stefan's office, because he had done more than anyone to keep the building worthy of it. The staff received wage adjustments across 3 departments, a revised benefit structure, and a development program that gave people a genuine pathway to grow within the building, rather than having to leave it to advance. Watching people take that seriously, watching someone from the front desk move into a management training track, watching the banquet team develop real institutional pride in what they did every day, was the part of the work that satisfied me most. My father called about 4 months after the gala and asked if we could meet. We sat in a quiet coffee shop not far from the hotel on a gray November morning. He looked older than I was prepared for, or perhaps I hadn't been looking at him closely enough before. He held his coffee with both hands and was quiet for longer than I had ever seen him quiet. I said things that weren't fair, he said finally, over many years, and that night, he paused for a moment. I'm not good at this, but I wanted you to hear it from me. I thanked him, I meant that sincerely. He asked whether there was a possibility of building something better between us. I told him I was open to it, and I told him plainly what that would require. No commentary on my choices at family gatherings, no performances for an audience, no measure of my worth against whatever version of my future he had decided I should have lived. He listened without interrupting, which was new. He nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they are genuinely processing something, rather than waiting for their turn to speak. I don't know yet what we will manage to become to each other. Some conversations since then have been easier than others. What I do know is that his opinion of me no longer determines how I understand myself. That shift happened gradually, over years of building something real with my own hands, and it happened permanently. The night in the ballroom was the moment it became visible to the world. It was not the moment it became true. A few months ago, I stood in front of a new group of hires at the Granville during their orientation morning. They were attentive and nervous in the way people are at the beginning of something, eager to make a good impression, not yet sure what the place was really like or what would be asked of them. I told them that every role in a hotel is connected to every other role, and that the experience a guest has is assembled from hundreds of small decisions made by people who will likely never meet one another. I told them that I had spent years doing work that someone important in my life considered beneath me, and that I would make that same choice again without hesitation. I told them that the most valuable thing they could do, in any position, was to pay attention to the details around them, to the people beside them, to what was working and what quietly was not. I didn't tell them I owned the building they were sitting in. That was not the part that mattered. The part that matters, the thing I have returned to more times than I can count, since the evening my father stood in a room that belonged to me and tried to make me feel small, is that what you build through doing the work, slowly and honestly and from the ground up, is more durable than anything handed to you for standing in the right room. That is the only thing I would want anyone who hears this story to carry with them. Whatever room you're in, whatever you're told is beneath you, keep learning, keep building, and let the work speak when the time comes, because it always does.